Hello, grappling fans.
Are you ready?
Ooh, yeah!
Let me tell you something, brother. British Wrestling's very own Steve Saxon presents the Sax Wrestling Podcast. It's just one more platform for him to get his shit in.
Welcome back to the Sax Wrestling Podcast, an impromptu episode 5. I say impromptu because I had not planned to bang out another episode so soon after the Ricky Knight interview. I hope you enjoyed episode 4. Again, the audio quality wasn't too clever with the interview for Ricky Knight. This one, the interview I've lined up on this episode, is much, much better, you'd be glad to know. If you didn't catch the Ricky Knight interview, go back onto iTunes or Spreaker, and it should be there right underneath this one. So, why the quick turnaround of episode 5? Well, yesterday I posted on the iSax podcast Facebook page asking people what they thought about the recent news that ITV tweeted that their World of Sport scheduled tapings that were supposed to take place on the 25th and 26th of May in Preston had been postponed, with the only real explanation of that it was due to contract negotiations. Of course, because no extra information was given in that, there was a lot of people just throwing ideas around, throwing their thoughts around as to why it was and which contracts were being negotiated. A lot of people pointing fingers at Jeff Jarrett, at Impact Wrestling, just presuming that they had something to do with it. A lot of people saying it was something to do with the ITV chief executive resigning. So all sorts of weird suggestions thrown out there. So in the midst of these, something like last count, something like 5,000 interactions with the post. Nick Aldis, aka Magnus of Impact Wrestling, Global Force Wrestling, and World Sport Wrestling, British wrestling, who is on my friends list, so he saw the post. And he started interacting with fans and responding to some of their theories. Things got a little bit heated. Some comments were thrown about from both sides, even to the point where Ricky Knight himself had to interject and to try and calm things down. But this is very much a hot topic at the moment, so that's the whole idea of the Sax Wrestling Podcast. I will be a little bit controversial. I will stir the pot a little bit just to get some answers, and this time it worked. Nick Aldis, who we've done business together before, just back in January. He was booked with Britannia Wrestling Promotions, my promotion over in Liverpool, went on against one of his old mentors, Frankie Sloan. Great matchup, available, the entire show in fact is available on YouTube for free. Britannia Wrestling gave that show away for free. So yeah, head over to YouTube and check that out. Nick got involved, and then he asked me personally to arrange an interview with him so he could get his side across. He went away, he spoke to Jeff Jarrett, and Jeff Jarrett gave his consent and actually encouraged Nick to go ahead with this interview. And here we are. I haven't got a lot more to say. I kind of leave it to Nick to get his side across, and I kind of throw in a few questions as and when I've got them, but he pretty much covers every angle. Great interview, great listen. You'll find it very informative, hopefully. There's a few things in this interview that are not made public. ITV, as I have mentioned before, are notoriously keeping their cards close to the chest, not releasing a lot of information to the public, nor to their roster, nor to anybody involved in this production. Unfortunately, because of the way that they sent the tweets, it kind of did put a lot of heat and a lot of pressure on Impact, and this is actually the first and only public address by somebody from the Impact Wrestling or from the Anthem camp, in the form of Nick Aldis, who is kind of like the middleman. He is a British wrestler who works for Impact, works for Global Force, and now works for World of Sport Wrestling, so he is kind of that middle ground. And today he acts as the spokesman on behalf of Jeff Jarrett, Anthem, and Impact. A lot of it is his own personal opinions, his own personal feelings, as he does actually express during the interview. But there's a lot of facts in there, some interesting facts that I think everybody's going to be intrigued to hear about. And you can bet your money on that I did ask the questions that were asked to me over Facebook. And just talking about betting, I just want to take a moment to thank the very first sponsor of the Sax Wrestling Podcast, something that I actually use myself, which is great. But anybody who knows me, I like a bit of a gamble from time to time, but I do gamble responsibly, and I implore that you do exactly the same. I like to bet on anything from horses, dogs, to football, and even professional wrestling. Yes, it is a thing. You can actually do that these days. I've been using the longest running WWE betting tips and prediction site, wrestlingbetting.co.uk. I've been using it now for a couple of years. They don't just throw the options out there for you to pick the winners of the matches. They give their predictions and pretty much say at least 75% of the time they come true, at least in my case. And they have agreed to sponsor the Isaacs Wrestling podcast. Now, wrestlingbetting.co.uk, they cover all bookmakers before each WWE pay-per-view to get the best odds and accumulators, so you don't have to spend the time trawling through the endless apps and websites out there. Wrestlingbetting.co.uk saves you a lot of time, and today I'm going to save you a lot of money. That's right, courtesy of wrestlingbetting.co.uk. If you head over there now and type in www.wrestlingbetting.co.uk/ISACS, that's /ISACS, then you can sign up exclusively for free today. That's right. Nothing. Zilch. Zero. No cost at all. So treat yourself. Just a little. Even if it's just a quid here, a couple of quid there, it's worth a shot. You might end up quids in. That's www.wrestlingbetting.co.uk. So, without further ado, I'm not going to babble on anymore. This is an impromptu episode. I got nothing really planned. I made a couple of notes. I checked out a bit of back history on Nick, on Jeff, on Impact Wrestling, on World of Sport, on ITV, on Adam Crozier, the chief executive of ITV that's just resigned. I just did a quick research on them all, banged together some notes, and this is my call to Nick Aldis, who's currently in America, and this is his take on what's going on at ITV World of Sport. Enjoy.
Professional wrestling personalities with no filter in sight. Sit back and relax because it's time for the ISACS U-Talk interview. Seriously, who thinks of these names?
Okay, so today on the ISACS Wrestling Podcast, I am joined by Impact Wrestling, Global Force Wrestling, and World of Sport Wrestling superstar Nick Aldis, aka Magnus. Nick, first and foremost, thank you very much for giving up your time to speak with me today.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Now, this is stemmed from a post that I put up on the ISACS Podcast Facebook account yesterday, where I'd asked for thoughts and opinions from my listeners about the recent news that ITV have postponed their scheduled tapings of World of Sport on the 25th and 26th of May up at Preston Guildhall. There were a lot of opinions thrown about yesterday, Nick, and you and I connected on Facebook, so you saw some of the posts, and which, very unlike you decided to jump in and have your say. And those things were getting a little bit heated, at certain times. What are your thoughts? I mean, there's a lot of speculation going around. I mean, I think first and foremost, one of the problems here is that ITV have been, they haven't really given a lot. They've just said, it's been postponed because of contract negotiations, and a lot of people immediately have jumped on the bandwagon thinking it's automatically something to do with Impact Wrestling and or Jeff Jarrett.
Right.
You've obviously heard some of the crazy ideas that are floating around. Some are crazy, some not so crazy. We've got ideas stemming from that it was down to the Impact Wrestling or Jeff Jarrett wanting more creative control or wanting more money. Some people are saying it's got something to do with the ITV chief executive Adam Crozier resigning recently. And some people even think it's because Bobby Lashley just wants to squash all British talent and it wasn't going to happen. Yeah, absolutely crazy. But when you saw all these posts yesterday, you responded to quite a few of them. What's your take on this, Nick? Obviously, you are kind of like the middleman here. You are. I will say this. It's very. You're right. It's very unlike me at this point in my life to jump in. I told you yesterday. You caught me on a good day or a bad day, depending on how you look at it. Probably bad, but there you go. It was just. Well, you are. You're a starer. I mean, let's call a spade, Steve. You love. I mean, but that's what a good discussion is about. Is putting the cat among the pigeons. And Absolutely. You did that. You always tag me in these things, and you tag Jane in them, and you tag all the Marty Jones. Good Lord. Anyway, so I guess the thing that I knew that there were fans on there, and I knew that there were people who are somewhat involved in the business, people who are very involved in the business. You've got a whole sort of range of people on your thing. So it provided a little bit of a microcosm, I guess, of the overall opinion. So I was interested to,
I just, you caught me at a moment where I had some free time. I just dropped my kid off at school, and I was like, let me see what everyone's saying about this. And it wasn't so much what fan perception is, because no matter how completely off the mark it can be sometimes, there's really nothing you can do about it. Then there's really nothing you should do to change it, because they're entitled to their opinion and their perception. And that's sort of the way the business works. Sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes not so much. But when I saw people who were actively involved in the business in various levels of capacity and quality, starting to say some things that were just downright nuts, and on top of that, like, some of them were like verging on like xenophobic and just plain ignorant. I just went like, I can't take this anymore. Like, I've worked with some of these people, and I can't believe like that these are their real opinions. You know what I mean? Because the beauty and the horror of social media is that you get to see people's real personalities, because it sort of forms a middle ground between what people say behind your back and what people say to your face. Okay. Because they can articulate something, they take a bit more time to think about it. So you start to see a bit more of their real thoughts and feelings coming through. Obviously, you get guys like Paddy, like Ricky Knight, he's not afraid to share his opinion on any platform, So it's like what you see is what you get with a guy like him. But then, some of these other guys, the thing that, okay, I'll try and go through them bit by bit. I did end up, posting some stuff, because I was like, you know what, like, I'm just going to do it. And once I got started, it was like, well, I may as well just engage now, because I've done it once. There's no point just doing once and then just, I don't want to, and I want to state this too from the beginning. I'm actually not under contract. I'm a completely free agent at the moment, partly because my deal, or we're working on Handshake, because the contract that will eventually, end up being signed by me as a talent or whatever, it's based on this ITV stuff going through. So believe me when I say this, like, I have zero, vested interest. I don't have this sort of, oh, well, I'm under contract, so I have to vehemently, defend the people I'm under, because I'm under contract to no one. Jeff has obviously been a very, very integral part of my career, and has done, extended a lot of opportunities for me, and saw things in me that allowed me to achieve a lot of the things that I've achieved. So there's no doubt that I have a degree of loyalty and trust in Jeff, but at the same time, I also know the man personally, which a lot of these people don't. So I'm saying that some of the wariness of him is fair and justified, the same as it is of anyone in the wrestling business who's been around it for as long as he has. Because unfortunately, sometimes in the business, you have to piss someone off every now and then, and that's when you've been in the business your entire life, you obviously acquire a longer list of people that you've pissed off. And you'll find generally, Steve, that the people who have had the more success seem to have pissed more people off as well, and I'm probably someone who can attest to that, especially in Britain, but we'll get to that, later on. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm not sitting here just blindly defending it, going, I'm not an apologist for some of the things that have happened, previously with Impact. But people also have to understand that the Impact that they're dealing with today is essentially almost a completely new company. It was bought by Anthem. Anthem are a Canadian company who specialize in sports, entertainment, and media, and they are, from my, again, I've had limited dealings with them as of yet. Ed Nordum is our main, high up executive who kind of deals directly with Impact and is kind of in charge of it. But I also met the owner of the company. Jeff introduced me to him in Orlando a couple of weeks ago. They seem like they're into the product, but at the same time, they're businessmen. They're not just on this, like, because they want to they're not, for a lack of a better term, they're not money marks. You know what I mean? Like, which is what a term that likes to get thrown around. People who just want to throw money so they can go, I've got a wrestling company. They couldn't care less about that. They're also, looking at all of this, and they're learning as they go about the idiosyncrasies of the world we live in right now with social media and the internet, and how heavy the emphasis is in terms of influence on the wrestling business. I don't think they were perhaps completely aware of that, because in other forms of entertainment and sports and things like that, it's not as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as instant. So what I'm trying to get to is that for Game of Thrones, let's take that for example, a huge hit show, an absolute huge success, very high budget, lots of moving parts, shooting on locations, shooting in Belfast, shooting in wherever, loads of different cast members, in and out, and different people, and all sorts of different things. If Game of Thrones has to postpone, their shoot for their, next season by a month or whatever, no one's writing their obituary. You know what I mean? Like, no one's sitting there going, "Oh, I can't believe it," because people just aren't as interested in the, in the inner workings of the different studios and production companies and distribution companies and all the different people involved in putting a show like that to network.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah.
With wrestling, it's like because so many wrestlers have made a second career for themselves after they finished wrestling by basically divulging all of their, one-sided opinions on the way things work and their interpretation of the way things work without actually really ever seeing the full picture. Now, unfortunately, we have a situation where a great majority of the fans, particularly the ones who spend a lot of time on the internet, and I'm trying not to create that line of like internet fans and regular fans, because we're all on the internet. You know what I mean? The internet is everything. But you know what I'm saying when I articulate that, where there's like certain fans who really push.
I mean, the way I say, I was on a guest on the podcast last night, and I said pretty much the same thing, that fans seem to think these days that they have the right to know not just what is put on their screen or on a live show, but exactly who's doing the writing backstage, who's doing the producing, the name of the tech guy. And if they are asking for this information on the public platform and they're not receiving the answers, straight away you get a backlash, because they feel that they deserve that for whatever reason. But on the flip side of that, as you said about Game of Thrones as your example there, do you think one of the problems here was that ITV made such a big deal, quite rightly, about the revival of World of Sport, and they had the press conference and everything that's been going on social media and on TV, and there's been a big push for ticket sales, which I believe we're doing excellently well, for the 25th and 26th of May in Preston, and then all of a sudden it stopped, and no real explanation is given, just that it's been postponed.
Absolutely. There is absolutely some truth to what you said, and again, as I'm sure you can understand, I'm going to try and tread carefully.
Of course, absolutely, yeah.
Because, like, one of I'll let you know. I actually, Jeff is well aware that I'm doing this interview. He encouraged me to do it because he is as devastated as everyone else that this, that this unfortunately was conceivably the only option at the moment. But he's very keen in front of it, and so is Tom McClellan at ITV, by the way. I believe they're having a conversation today. That's, don't hold me to that, but one of the things that I can say, with confidence, without too much fear of reprisal, that I do think it was a poor choice of words on whoever was behind whoever's doing the ITV Twitter account. I thought it was a poor choice of words to say that it was due to contract negotiations.
Absolutely, it just left it so wide open for people to speculate, which is exactly why you and I are talking now.
And it immediately throws up, these sort of imaginations of someone playing hardball, or someone's moving the goalposts, and again, I'm not by any means, really in the loop on this. I'm as much in the loop as Jeff allows me to be. Which, at this point in my life, having done what I've done in my career and having the relationship with Jeff that I have is more than most, which is why I feel like it's my duty to sort of shut some of these blowhards down when they start saying all this stuff that's just ridiculous. So it's my understanding that the main issue was a scheduling thing, but when I say scheduling, I mean television scheduling. Obviously, this is a high budget show; it's a lot of money involved, and again, I think a lot of people have this idea in their head that if you get a show commissioned on a big time network or a big time channel like an ITV or something, that immediately it's just huge money. And they're rolling in it, and everyone's gonna make tons of money, and all the guys are gonna be huge stars. The reality is very different. I certainly don't mean to say that that it's the complete other end of that spectrum, but every show, no matter what it is, whether it's Breaking Bad or a wrestling show, the first couple seasons, no one's going to make serious scratch on that. Like, that's just the way it works, because they're going to make sure that it tracks well, and they're going to make sure that they can make advertising revenue from it. After that, and then once you define who's going to be, in demand, and who's going to drive a rating, and who's going to drive, advertising sales and all of those things, then you start to go, okay, now I know my market value. Case in point, the first season of Gladiators, like, none of us really made serious money. I mean, sure, for a 21-year-old who had been working for 40 quid a night at Butlins, like, pretty good scratch. But they wanted us to immediately sign a conditional contract for the second season for the same amount of money. And my agent, who I'd been, cognizant enough to get, basically went, no way are we signing that, And they said, well, why not? And they said, well, because we're confident that Nick's going to be a standout talent on this show. And so by the time the second season comes around, we think he's going to be much more valuable to you. So we want to be able to be in a position to negotiate. And these are things like, and this is how television works. Like, you see these shows that run into like season 7, 8, 9, and you think, oh, it's kind of jumped the shark. I wish that they should have kept it off at 6, 5 and 6. The fact is, it's because that's when there's huge money, because that's when advertisers are like, yep, this is a home run. Like, we know this is a guarantee. It's gonna help us drive people to our products, and so there's the money, right? And that's kind of what drives everything. What's happened with WS? I'm sorry to go on a tangent with it,
no,
but fine. My interpretation of it is that I think at first they were looking at it as, well, let's have a punt, right? Let's see what happens, and rightfully so. Like, they're a television channel; they have every right to be in that position because they hold all the cards in the sense of they have the television airtime. You know what I mean? Like, that's the most valuable commodity that they're trading in. So they're looking at it as, okay, let's do 10 one-hour episodes, and we'll see where it goes from there. Obviously, Jeff is slightly more optimistic and has a bit more of a vision for this. And Anthem being somewhere between the two, where they're crunching numbers and they're also willing to take a bit of a punt to like anyone has to be successful in business. You've got to take a risk every now and then. They're kind of talking about the future, and they're going, look, this is a lot of money if it's just going to be 10 episodes and done. So they're pressuring, and and again, I don't want to sort of give the wrong impression here, but they're I would say pressuring isn't the right word. They are talking, they are discussing very seriously, persuasively about the future, about beyond 10 episodes. And in terms of not just more television time, and I don't know what that schedule would look like, but they're also talking about, a proper live event touring schedule, licensing, merchandising, and these, I think, again, I could be wrong, but my general impression of it is that perhaps ITV weren't thinking about that stuff as as readily as, obviously a wrestling company person. That's that's their other major revenue stream. So they're already thinking about that stuff. Whereas ITV was thinking, this is a show, and the conversation got to a point where it's my understanding that it basically went, in its current form, it's going to be hard for us to return on this investment because, again, contrary to what people might think, this show requires a huge investment monetarily from the Anthem and Impact side of it as well. It's not ITV just saying, here you go, here's a time slot. Like, that they agree on a budget and they agree who's going to pay what. I don't know what those numbers are, but I do know that, both sides are putting money up and taking a risk with this.
So it's more of a partnership. As opposed to ITV saying, Jeff, Impact, we've got this time slot for you, 10 weeks. This is what we're looking for, the family entertainment side of things. You go out there and do it for us. We'll pay you X amount of dollars. What you're saying is Impact and ITV are actually both putting money in the pot to make this as big as possible. Right? Okay.
Now, yes, especially now because the discussions are heading towards ancillary items like live events, licensing, merchandising, etc. You know what I mean? So that then you're getting into a situation where, they're saying, all right, well, they want to be a partner in the venture, not just be the network that goes, sure, we'll pay you to this. Because remember, they own, the World of Sport brand, and it's their own, entity in a lot of ways. They're hiring Impact and as the production company, essentially. So basically, because again, I really don't want to say all of this is based on things that I've been told, and not, none of this is 100% confirmed, but this is way closer to accurate than some of the crap I've been reading from these other people. Because now the discussions are centered around more long-term efforts. Now, in a very practical sense, they've run into a bit of a scheduling issue because obviously they're a big-time TV channel. They don't just have random time slots sort of sitting around, available through the year. They're everything's already scheduled. So in a very practical sense, now they're sort of going, well, if this is going to be, more than this, then we may have to wait, to start airing the show. And this is very common in television. This happens a lot with a lot of shows. It just unfortunately, wrestling fans have a distorted view of things where they want instant gratification. They see an announcement, or they hear it, or not even an announcement. Sometimes they just hear a rumor, they read something on a dirt sheet website or whatever, and they want it today. Like, where is it? What's happening with it? Why isn't it like right here in my living room right now? And why isn't my favorite wrestler on it? And why isn't this person getting more of a push? It's just, it's not an accurate way to, it's an accurate expectation. I will say there are a couple of factors going into that. One, yes, Impact has had a poor history in the last few years of making too many, announcements or promising announcements, and being a little quick to rush to that stuff. I felt like most of that was really more of a Dixie Carter issue, and I really don't want to get into too much about Dixie because I have a great deal of gratitude towards her, but clearly, there were certain areas where she was lacking and needed more help. And one of those was she wanted that gratification all the time and was sometimes too quick to jump the gun and say, we've got a huge announcement coming up, and it would be like, we're changing time slot. It's so. Yeah. There was definitely some sensitivity to that, and rightfully so, to Impact, right? And then also the other side of it is that everybody in the business is always going to compete with the juggernaut in the sense of fan perception, all the way down to live events and everything else. And with WWE, they are in a position because they have such immense resources that, again, people I don't know if they really fathom the kind of resources that they have, that they have the ability to say, we're going to do this, and then immediately put it to, put that product out there, and it's gangbusters, and it's huge, production value and everything else, because they have all their own stuff in-house. They're a once in a lifetime organization in that respect, like, because they, you know, there are, it's 3 generations of promoter, and the third of which, you know, being Vince McMahon, like, who just constantly reinvested in his own business to the point where he has all of his own things at his fingertips, so he doesn't have to wait for these sort of, you know, for these things. But unfortunately for everybody else, this is just, you know, these are things that happen with, you know, with growing partnerships. And the one thing I said to some of the boys when they were starting to get worried about this, because like you say, I've sort of become this, you know, impromptu middleman, was that they wouldn't have rushed to the press conference and the announcement and everything if that hadn't been signed and sealed. That deal for the 10 episodes and all that was done. Like, that deal is set, it's signed, it's everything. That nobody, ITV would never, and Anthem and all that, would never have organized all of that stuff. You know, the press conference, bringing all the talent in, flying me in, and put, you know, all these different things. They would never have done all that had it not been 100% down on paper. That's why I kept sitting around until the very last minute, because it was like lawyers going back and forth, you know. So I know that deal was set. What's happening now is that now they've all in good faith gone back to the table and said, maybe we were both a little bit quick to rush to this deal, and maybe we should do a different one, you know. So that there's fault on both sides. The biggest mistake, unfortunately, was just both of them just being very keen to get to it. But that's also a good thing, because it indicates their enthusiasm for the product.
Yeah. As you said about Dixie Carter jumping the gun quite a lot, and you know, she did it so often that her big announcements kind of lost their appeal very, very quickly. I was going to say, well, whose decision was it to make the announcements that World of Sport was coming back for the 10 episodes and the press conference? But obviously, you kind of just answered that. So ultimately, the question that everybody's asking is, what are the contract negotiations, and who are they between? Obviously, between ITV and somebody. Is it the wrestlers? Is it Impact?
Anthem.
Is it Jeff? You know, Anthem? Is it Jeff Jarrett? So it is absolutely between ITV and Anthem. But this isn't a case of one's trying to get more money or more creative control. You know, you've seen those ideas kind of floating around. This is literally about, well, we've got a great idea here, but if we kind of postpone it just a little bit, the idea can grow and grow and grow, and we can look beyond those 10-week spots.
Right. You're talking about, let me just sort of put it into perspective a little bit as best I can. Again, these are just based on loose numbers that I've heard, and let me just say this. I told you, I texted you earlier and said, like, I've got a bit of a dental issue going on, so if I sound a bit lispy, that's why.
Right. Okay.
But my gums as well. I keep having to, like, swallow and spit because I'm trying not to bite down on my swollen up gum. Anyway, again, these are based on loose numbers that were sort of thrown out to me. 10 1-hour episodes of television, you know, in the form of the original agreement that was signed. You're talking about, it's probably costing somewhere around $1 million. Okay. I mean, obviously ITV are a huge company, but nobody, you know, an Anthem are a sizable organization themselves, but nobody's just going to throw away $1 million. I don't know how that's split between the two as far as, like, who's putting up what, but that's about what you're looking at, right? Nobody's going to just go ahead and do that if they think, well, geez, you know, like, where do we go from here? Because if you're not ready to capitalize on it, somebody else will capitalize on it, you know, and so you're not gonna sort of commit all that capital to something just so that you create a bunch of guys, you know, you give a bunch of guys, you know, a national platform, you know, and a huge number of eyeballs, so they can then get plucked by somebody else, or just go and, you know, make money off their, you know, but for themselves, you know, off the back of the capital that you committed. That's the part of it that people don't think of sometimes. People just look at the company, you know, whenever they think it's always like the boys do this too. The wrestlers are guilty of this too. They look at it as like the company's just endless money and they're rich and they've got, you know, who care, like, they don't care about us, you know, and we, you know, the boys are always getting screwed, you know, and that's the perception. the reality isn't quite the same, and especially when you're talking about a company that's very new in the sense of this new Impact Anthem ownership. So like, this is a sizable chunk of change to be committing on both sides of it, and again, in practical terms, because all this other stuff then sort of came into discussion as far as like what happens after these 10 episodes, then they all sort of went, oh, maybe we were a bit quick to make this deal, and maybe we should be thinking about another one. My guess is, again, this is completely just speculation on my part, so let me just clarify that. This is not anything I've been told. But my impression of it is probably that they were into the show, they wanted to do it, they did the 10 episodes, and then once they developed more of a relationship with Jeff, and Jeff started articulating, his vision for where he thinks it could go and everything like that, they probably got excited and went, oh, wow, this guy's right. Like, we absolutely have a huge opportunity here, but you only get one chance, especially with British public. You know what I mean? Like with television, you have one chance to do it right. And that was one thing I said very early on when this stuff came out. I was like, we have to make sure, that we use the right talent, and the creative is right, and the presentation of this is right, because you get one chance with British people. You get, you know what I mean, and they love to tear someone down, like the tabloids and the and the sort of snarky nature of our sort of media. They love to see their perception of a big thing failing, and wrestling, as always, in history, has always been unfairly chastised by sort of highbrow media. So I say, like, the only option you have to be successful with pro wrestling, especially with the sort of British media culture, is to blow the doors off and to be popular and to get good numbers, because then they can't say anything about it. And so, if there's even a sniff of things, declining, that's sometimes all it takes. That's what happened with Gladiators. It was the same thing, where it was, we were the highest rated show on that channel, the highest rated, and two things happened. One, like, the numbers declined so slightly, but enough where people could go, up, Gladiators numbers are falling, and that was it. And then a new guy took over the channel who decided he wanted to have a crappy chat show in that spot, which failed after about 5 episodes. But anyway, I digress. My point is that I've been around this stuff. I'm aware that I chose to get into the sports entertainment field, which unfortunately leaves you're almost open to criticism and mockery from all sides, including even people who are supposed to be in your corner. And that's the part that bugs me a little bit, is that I want to try and unify everyone by saying, look, if you want this to work, we're going to have a hard enough time as it is with the tabloids and, the hipster culture and everything else, all wanting to just, find anything wrong with it and tear it down and bury it. Okay? So if we're infighting, and I'm just talking as sort of fans and the people in the business and everything else, if they're all going to start tearing it apart before it's even happened, then you're minimizing the chance of it being a success. Like, I liken it to when, Vince McMahon was busy taking over the world, and all these other, regional promoters all said, we're going to get together and blah, blah, blah. And Vince joked, like, they can't even agree on what to order for lunch. Like they're gonna fight amongst themselves so badly that they'll implode before they even provide any competition for me. Right. And that I want to avoid any sort of situation like that from happening. And unfortunately, Steve, the sad truth is, and you know this as well as I do, you're a promoter. You have to deal with the fragile egos of wrestlers and referees and people who you think, how the hell do you have any kind of ego at all? Like, but they do, right, in this business. Who the reality is that they can articulate it and spin it any way they want, but most of the time, most of the shit is coming from people who just simply weren't booked, who simply weren't approached to be a part of the project.
Right, yeah,
And
we've seen a hell of a lot of that since the first announcement of the New Year's Eve special.
Right.
You could see immediately, before they announced the roster, you could pretty much pin out, well, he's not booked,
Right.
she's not booked, and he
Right.
is. And
Exactly.
you're absolutely right.
I got inundated when that New Year's Eve thing. I will tell you the truth. I was not approached. I was not contacted by anyone, and in fact, the only people that were involved in World of Sport who contacted me were some of the other talent who were just assuming that I was going to be part of it and that maybe they were keeping me a secret. And I said, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not going to be there. Like, it's not. Nope, never heard from anyone. But I didn't go around going, oh, it's going to be shit and it's going to be this and it's going to be that, because first of all, like, why would I do that to my brothers in the wrestling business? Like, why would I do that to the guys who I should be wanting to help more than anyone? Secondly, it just doesn't make good business sense because obviously, look at where we're at now. Had I gone on record and buried it and said, oh, this is it's going to be a flop and this and that, and I thought the pilot sucked and everything else. What? Even when ITV and even when Jeff and Anthem and stuff came into play, if ITV had said to them, we can't have this guy involved because he buried us, blah blah blah, Jeff would have had no choice but to go, okay, no problem. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make good business sense to
Because any of the guys that I have seen, I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but there's quite a few out there, British wrestlers, who seem to be a little bit bitter that they are not on, or they've not been selected for the initial roster of World of Sport, and WWE UK as well. If they this is the thing, they could still get that nod, and it's what a lot of people were saying about the New Year's Eve special was, well, why wasn't guy on? Why wasn't this guy on? Or why wasn't she on? And the conversation I had with because I went to see the live recordings, and I thought it was very well done. It wasn't what we're used to, or what I'm used to in terms of British wrestling. I'm not used to seeing it in a studio format. But the end result that I sat and watched as well with my family on New Year's Eve, I thought was excellent. I thought it was really, really well put together. But these guys that are selecting it and saying, oh, he should be on the roster or she shouldn't, that is the initial roster for a 2-hour special on New Year's Eve. They could not fit. There's a lot of great talent in Britain at the moment. No way they could try and ram all those into one episode. But what they're doing is they're trying to take different elements. For me personally, they were going for the nostalgia moment as well by having Grado on there, who was like the modern day Big Daddy, Dave Mastiff, who was like the modern day Giant Haystacks, and then they had all the new elements of wrestling, like your delicious Danny Hope, CJ Banks, and they put together a great production with the hope, which has actually happened, that they'll get commissioned for a series, if you like, and then we would for 10 weeks they're not going to have that one roster on for 10 weeks. You're going to see new guys coming in. You're going to see imports coming in and out of it as well. But the guys that are slating it online, that as much as they've been slating it, if they get the call up from Jeff or from ITV, they will be all over that.
Of course. I wrote my next column in FSM is going to be about all this, and I forwarded you, a copy of it before it went to print and stuff like that. And one of the things I made a point to say in that was that, look, I'm not trying to alienate any particular type of fan here, okay? But if you're the type of fan who has every different machination of the Bullet Club shirt, who thinks that Kenny Omega versus Okada was the greatest match you've ever seen, or who what goes to every What Culture show, or any of those things, right? More power to you. This show might not be your favorite show. I'm not saying that you shouldn't come, and I'm not saying you shouldn't like it, but please be prepared to see certain elements of the show that aren't going to be just directly catered to you. And if you want a show that is directly catered to you, they have tons of them already out there. You can go to Progress, you can go to ICW, you can go to What Culture, you can go to the guys in Ireland. I've forgotten their name off the top of my head. OTT, right. I mean, obviously most of those guys, apart from What Culture, have all sort of now been consumed under the WWE umbrella in some capacity. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
They're catering to a certain taste. Okay, you've got plenty available to you already. Please don't become one of those guys that, that every single thing that has the word wrestling in it, you just assume, and please don't adopt that entitlement mentality that, like, oh, this wasn't exactly how I wanted it, because we have I say we, ITV and Anthem and everything else, the World of Sport, the project has a responsibility to reach a much greater portion of an audience than that. Unfortunately, they are not in the business of trying to cater to that niche portion of the audience. Okay, and I understand that some guys get offended when it's niche. Okay, but what I'm saying is that at the moment there's a lot of different companies fighting over the same audience. Okay, yes, they are the most. They do provide the most output in terms of financially, right? It's like any business thing. Like if you're to take advertising revenue for an example, right? Like tennis and golf, don't do anywhere near the numbers that like, let's say, Harry Hill's TV Burp does, right? But they probably do about the same amount in advertising revenue because those people that are watching that thing are, buying Mercedes and they're buying Rolex watches and everything else, so they can charge high dollar for that advertising revenue. In a similar sense, like the kind of fans that are religiously going to go to every Progress show, all the OTT shows, all the ICW shows, etc. They're guys who are committing a much higher portion of their, they're spending much more per head than an average, casual fan. But when you talk about television, there's just simply not enough of them to make it, a worthwhile endeavor. And they're not in the business of trying to compete over that same small pocket of fans. If those fans want to dip in, great. But the responsibility here is to try and provide a hit show for the nation, whether it be existing wrestling fans or new fans.
Absolutely. I mean, ITV have a format to follow as well, don't they? I mean, Saturday afternoons, Saturday tea time, Saturday evenings, all about the family entertainment. It does, as you said, then whether it be Harry Hill, whether it be Gladiators, whether it be Anton Deck or X Factor, they're all family-orientated shows. So if they're going to put this World of Sport, I mean, people forget sometimes that when World of Sport was taken off TV, 30 years ago, one of the reasons certainly that I've read up many a time is because the new director Greg Dyke was looking towards going down the more family avenue, and he didn't feel that wrestling or the World of Sport wrestling at that time fit the niche of the family entertainment. And there's a lot of bitter people about that, still very bitter about that decision, but in hindsight, look at ITV now to where they were back then.
Yeah, I've heard that about Greg Dyke. He was vilified by all the people that sort of helped break me into the business, because they were all sort of from that era, or a lot of them were anyway.
Well, a lot of people lost their income, lost their job because, I'm not saying because of him, but they seem to think it's because of that one person who made that one decision.
It's never just one person, but it's easier to do that than to accept the fact that numbers were declining and the production values weren't moving with the times and they weren't putting out a product that was comparable to that of WWE at the time. That's just the simple truth. But that's, I don't think that the World of Sport Wrestling from before, I just don't think that they move with the times quickly enough, particularly in terms of booking. By the time it got to the 80s, the wrestling that we had access to, from WWF was heavily storyline driven, and so was if you could find it, was all the NWA stuff. It was very, there was just much more to it. There were all these other elements. It wasn't just, in the red corner,
exactly. The production values even back then in the 80s were amazing compared to what we were pushing out on our TV over here.
Right. There were for kids it was like, oh my God, like Roddy Piper did this and smashed a coconut over Jimmy Snuka's head, and all these sort of things, right? It was, it wasn't just kind of, oh, here comes one guy to the ring and he's a bad guy because he cheats.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a whole separate thing. But yes, that ultimately, television is fickle, and things can change, can change in a heartbeat, especially when the head of that, because they always, if you're a head of a television channel, you're essentially playing God. You kind of, you build it in your own image. You put things out there that you like in the hope that other people like them too. The only reason that Gladiators came back was because Richard Wolff, who was the head of Sky One at the time, he was a huge, he really thought American television was kicking our ass at that time. So he was like, he went out and got 24, he got Lost, he got all these hit US shows for Sky One, turned the channel around, and then when he got wind that NBC Universal were going to have another crack at American Gladiators, he went, boom, I'm doing it too. Right. And then he fell in, and he also loved pro wrestling, which is why he liked me. I wasn't supposed to talk on that show, and then I just took the mic and just said, well, I'll ask for forgiveness instead of permission. Cut a promo, and then Richard Wolf came into the dressing room afterwards and said, that's what I want from you every week. Like, that's what the show's been missing. He understood, like content, driving ratings. It wasn't just fluff stuff, for the sake of it. Like, he wanted to create moments and create drama, and that's what we'll have to do with the show also. It can't just be like a kind of like, hey, come, watch this like silly wrestling for an hour and then go about your business. Like, we're gonna have to create, and it's a difficult thing to do with an hour time slot. You're gonna have to provide, and it's a balancing act, because you've got to create enough content that's satisfying like a casual audience, that's not overly aggressive and a little bit too strong for a family with young children, all the way up to elderly people. But you've also got to provide enough, personal issue and relatable story arcs that people can then go, oh, I want to see where this goes. It's not as simple. Like, again, wrestling fans in the wrestling bubble who consume every single bit of the product, regardless of whether they pretend to hate it or not, like, that they're not the issue. They'll be back. It's everyone else, and it's and there's a whole lot of parameters to work with, especially when you get to the likes of an ITV level of television channel.
I mean, you said before about the ITV, the big top dogs there. They all kind of like a god. Completely agree with that. So with the latest news of Adam Crozier, the ITV chief executive, resigning, has this had any impact on the world of sports moving forward at all? Or anything that you've heard?
I have no idea. I honestly, I wouldn't want to comment on it either way, because the first I learned of it was honestly when I saw it come up in our discussion. I didn't know about. I haven't heard anything about that, so I would be surprised if it has. The only thing I would say is that it might be why there's a little bit of a delay in terms of making this new deal, because it might be something that nobody like. Anytime that a new head honcho comes in, nobody wants to immediately go to him and put something on his desk. Hey, I've made this huge commitment. What do you think? So it might be one of those things where they're trying to sort of get the lay of the land first. But again, this is just speculation on my part, based on a small amount of experience in the television industry.
Okay. Just something I want to just quickly go back on. Also, under the umbrella of contracts, there's obviously that was thrown out there. It was contract negotiations. I know from a couple of my friends who work for my wrestling company, Britannia Wrestling Promotions, who were also contracted to World of Sport, that they were given an initial contract, which I believe was 9 months, which I thought was a little bit of a weird number, but it was 9 months. Will the tapings be moved now? Will they then be moved to later in the year to fit this new format? Will that affect any of the wrestlers, do you think? Well, basically what I mean is, are we going to, are the roster as it is right now, as it stands today, do you think that prolonging this and possibly not extending the contracts of some of the wrestlers, do you think this will affect ITV World of Sport?
I don't know. Obviously, I haven't seen those contracts. I've spoken to some of the boys, because that was another thing that they asked me about too, because they wanted to know, well, who am I dealing with? Do I deal with them? Do I deal with ITV? Like, what's And I honestly, I just would relay this stuff to Jeff and say, I think you need to talk to the boys, because some of these guys are just there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse, in terms of rumor spinning and all those sort of things than saying nothing. In some ways, like there's nothing worse than, especially with the talent, leaving them sitting around wondering what's coming.
I mean, right. I mean,
having said
especially
that,
with WWE UK. I mean, there's been I've discussed in my podcast before, and there's a lot out there on the internet about the reasoning why WWE started this WWE UK, and apparently it was because their average UK viewers are 8 million, and ITV. I don't know how they worked this out, but ITV had predicted on New Year's Eve they were going to get 8 million views. Vince McMahon kind of his little arsehole was going a little bit, and he's like, well, that potentially is my fan base. So go over there. Oh, you got 6 months. Let's start a UK division. We did.
Hold on.
Since that time,
How did they? Just curious.
Yep.
How did they come up with the number of WWE's UK audience being 8 million?
These are just things that I've read over time. I've read them more than one source. Again, it's until it actually comes out of Vince McMahon's mouth or somebody that matters' mouth, it's all speculation. But these are the numbers that were thrown about.
I mean, I don't know either, but that seems mighty high to me. That seems awfully high. But then maybe they're just talking about, total consumers of a WWE product in one way, shape, or form, whether it be merchandise, a DVD, watching the show,
the network,
going to a live event.
Live shows, exactly. And then WWE came over here and they've signed a number of guys on new contracts, quite new contracts, where they're still able to work the independent scene. But they did that after ITV had put their roster on contracts. So there's certain members of the ITV World Sport roster that I believe would have been offered a WWE contract. So now that these tapings have been moved or set back a little bit, if some of these roster members suddenly come out of contract with World of Sport, is there a fear that some of the key guys will jump ship over to WWE?
I don't think there's any fear of it. I mean, there's if you're asking me, I dare say that might happen. That one or two guys. There's one guy in particular that I feel like is very likely to go, but I'm not going to say who because I don't want to.
No, that's fine.
I don't want to jeopardize that for him. And I can just say, based on my own communications with WWE over the years, that that anything is possible. Things can happen very fast, or they can not happen at all, and they can happen very slowly. Everything changes all the time. As far I don't know what their contracts with ITV are. I don't know how they're structured and that. I know that Jeff had he had alluded to something about well, right now we've got most the guys are kind of safe. I know he alluded to something like that. But personally, I think there's so much talent available that I'm not even worried. Like I wouldn't be worried if they took it's up to the boys. Like I'm glad that there are options available. I think
Absolutely.
It's really cool.
That's brilliant.
I think it's really cool that we're sitting here in 2017 talking about a company, wrestlers being under contract to an organization in England that who potentially could be snapped up by WWE. I mean, these are think about that. When I first got into the business in 2004, 2003, 2004, like it's insane to think that this is where we are today. And to think that I'm a player in this. You know what I mean? It's interesting, and it's I think that, but again, I don't think that, again, I don't want to speak for Jeff, but I don't think that he would want anyone there who didn't want to be there. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he's going to want anyone there just because he's going to be like, I'm going to lock these guys under lock and key and they won't be able to go anywhere. If they think that they have an opportunity with WWE, that, and that's what they want to do, then they should do it. And I feel like he would take the same approach. I think it's just, I think it's one of those things where this kind of talk and this sort of speculation about these kind of things, I think it's just fun for people. People find it fun to talk about. Like it's intriguing and it's interesting and it's like it's fun little gossip to sort of throw around. And Mickey and I do the same thing. We'll sit there and I'll go, Lord, did you see this? Did you see that? And we sit there because it's it's our love, it's our business, and it's our and for us it's also our livelihood. But so we've obviously both of us been heavily involved, so we engage in it too, and then we just sit there and go, guys, it's silly. I mean, no one knows what's really going on, so why are we even talking about it? But it's just one of those things. But yeah, I think I don't want to say this to disparage any of the guys, but I think that the talent pool is so deep at this point that I don't, we lose a few guys, we gain a few guys. That's always going to happen.
Of course it is.
And
yes.
and I don't think any one person has a huge bearing on the show. No.
Has there been any mention of any conflicts of interest with Impact being on Spike TV and Anthem's involvement with World of Sport, which obviously was going to be on ITV, which is the biggest free platform network in Britain? Has there been any mention of any conflicts of interest?
No, and the funny thing about that is that when all of this stuff sort of started going down, I was still being coaxed back in by Jeff. Do you know what I mean? Like I was having multiple discussions, different people at different places, and and also trying to in a very practical sense with Mickey being back on the road and and making money with WWE and being on that schedule and stuff. We were talking very practical sense of like, well, what exactly do I these opportunities, what exactly do I want to do at this point? Because we've also got to take into account the fact that we have a 2-year-old, that we have to look after. And so a lot of this stuff, I was deliberately staying neutral to it because I didn't want any of those things to sort of to influence my decision. I had to make the best decision for my son and for me and for my family and everything else. But when one of the things, Jen and I talked, and we could talk as friends just as much as we could as a business relationship. And one of the things he said was, I think you're gonna like what we've got, for the UK. And I told him flat out, I said, at the time, this was before the Spike deal had been announced. And I said, to be honest with you, Jeff, until there's a UK thing, like I'm not signing, because I'm not doing anything, because that's my market, you know what I mean? Like that's it's obviously I don't, I'm not saying that there's no value in me anywhere else, but that's the sort of, that's important to me. So, and he said, well, he's like, I can't tell you exactly what it is just yet, but and then a few days later he told me, and then it was announced, and I was like, that's really great. Spike TV, and it's a division of 5, so there's my 5 and all that stuff. I was like, that's very good, and the numbers for that have been have beaten expectation, So I was thinking, well, okay, that's good, and then he mentioned something about ITV, and I just thought, well, maybe it was like a Freudian slip, like maybe he just sort of said the wrong thing, or maybe he just, because I was thinking, I didn't know anything about that at the time. And then, a week later, he calls me and says, all right, this is what's going down. And I just went like, what? Like, you just signed a deal with, I said, and that was the first thing that came out of my mouth when he told me about what was going on. ITV came to us, they blah, blah, blah. They want us to, produce the show, and, it's going to be, it's going to be its own entity, and it's going to be our own show. Obviously, one of the first things that came up in conversation was you. And I was like, they are aware of the fact that you just signed a deal for Impact to be on Spike and Channel 5 and My 5, right? And he laughed and said, "Yep, like they know, like they just So I don't think it is, because obviously that deal came first. So it was one of those things where they said, we just signed this thing for our American show to be aired here, and they just said, yeah, that's fine.
So are they going to be treated as two completely different commodities? As in, on Spike, you're going to see the Impact Wrestling guys and girls, and on World of Sport, it's going to be completely World of Sport. There's not going to be no crossover between World of Sport and Impact.
No, well, obviously that's not, because I've been promoted as a roster member for both. They announced that Bobby was going to be on that show, and they also announced that Congo Kong was going to have a role. So obviously that's not the case. But
will storylines intertwine between the two different networks and two different shows, or?
I don't know, and I doubt it. But maybe this is all maybe this is some of the stuff that's that's involved in the discussions. That I don't know, but I would be very surprised if. I'd be very surprised if Impact stuff was discussed heavily on the ITV show, because that probably would provide a conflict of interest. But again, this is just me spitballing. I think that would be something where I could imagine ITV going, we don't want you to drive, viewers to another channel. However, I don't know, I'm sure that there will be plenty of cross stuff in terms of what Impact puts out, especially in their digital, in their social media and stuff. I'm sure there will be, because they want all of the that they've got their fingers in to boil. So it's, they want to. So I think that I think it's just going to be one of those things where they're all just going to try and apply some common sense, and be like, what's the best thing? What's the best thing for each, thing to thrive and to be successful. And obviously, most of that, Steve, will come down to the money.
Of course, it's all about the money. I mean, obviously, on the flip side as well, you don't want your new audience, your World of Sport audience, you don't want them to be having to tune in. Oh, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. They are, as you said, they're going to be kind of like a new audience. So if you're going to carry storylines on between Spike TV and ITV, you're then relying on your fans to watch both TV networks. Otherwise, they're going to get lost in the loop, and that's something you don't want as a new product, right?
No, that won't happen. And this is one thing I do want to dispel, is because this is one thing I saw more than anything that really got my goat, was this whole like, oh, bloody Yanks coming and taking, and taking over. Da, da, da. Well, first of all, like, how can you say anything about Trump? If you're then you're then on the flip side of it gonna be like, bloody Americans coming in and I'm doing all this and blah blah blah. Like, it should be British people only, and and it's like, God, it's 2017.
Yeah, exactly. How many Brits at the moment are over in America working?
Right. One of the things I pointed out was that, hey, when an American comes to England, they're an import, okay? An import has been one of those words that within the business has sort of become like a little bit of a derogatory sort of thing, hasn't it? You know what I mean? It's sort of become a little like, oh, imports, right? Which is hilarious to me. But I said, you're aware of the fact that every time a Brit goes to America or Japan or Mexico or wherever else, they're an export.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then when but to the people in that country, they're an import. So how is it okay to take me, for example, to champion it and be like, wow, it's so great, like, you broke a glass ceiling and you became a world champion at Impact, and like you were the first Brit to ever do it, like, oh, blah 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 blah, and they got a lot of media coverage, more than we expected. But then to turn around and start saying like, this should be a British show with just British talent. Hey, newsflash, it is vast majority British talent, okay? But the fact is that there's only like, let's take Bobby Lashley for example, okay? I don't think I could be wrong, but I haven't seen a lot of guys who look like Bobby Lashley walking around in Peckham. Do you know what I mean? Or
Okay.
I haven't seen a guy like Bobby Lashley anywhere else in the world. Okay, he just happens to be American, but he also happens to be a cartoon level freak of nature who moves like a cat and looks like something out of a movie. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't see that most of if these guys, if any of the talent are worried about this, then that just speaks more to their insecurity than it does to their concern for the show. Because the fact of the matter is that you should see a guy like Bobby Lashley, and if you're a professional, and if you understand the business, and if you have confidence in your ability, you should see a guy like Bobby and go, "Whoa, yeah, like, I want to work with him."
Absolutely, it's an opportunity, isn't it? And I think a lot of the guys I know on the World of Sport roster, I think that's the approach that they would most certainly take. As it's an opportunity for them. It's an opportunity for them to be showcased on an even bigger platform.
I would hope so. Another thing that is important to point out here is that, like, without these other countries embracing talent from Britain, over the last decade or so, especially, I don't think the British scene would be what it is today, which would have allowed these opportunities to now take place for the guys in Britain. So this idea that there are talent in Britain who haven't, who haven't necessarily cracked it anywhere else. That's not to say they can or can't. They just haven't yet. But this idea that they're somehow, doing this honorable thing, or this somehow, are more elevated than those of us who went overseas. Like it was implied to me by someone who's a promoter who's attempted to run some fairly big shows. It was implied to me that I was seen as like an American. You know what I mean? And I sort of said, I understand where you're coming from, in the sense that I've lived here for going on 7 years, and I have an American wife, and all the rest of it. But like, what other choice was there? I said, you realize, Drew Galloway did the same thing. Stu Bennett did the same thing. William Regal did the same thing. Finlay did the same thing. It's like that. But in the last decade, because a lot of were able to, within our different companies, and including like Zack Sabre and now Will Ospreay in Japan and all these other guys, because we were able to, throughout all the different range of the sort of tastes within the business, where you take Impact, WWE, like the sort of high-level independents like PWG, and then or Japan, like Noah and New Japan Pro Wrestling and so that. Between all of them, there was some high-profile British talent. So suddenly, the credibility of the UK as a whole, as a place to find good talent, and as a place where, the wrestling was, a high level, a lot of that, I feel like, the credit belongs to our generation. Because on top of that, then a lot of fans who then watched us then also remember, hey, I remember seeing him at Fairfield Halls, or I remember seeing a tag match with Magnus, Wade Barrett, Sheamus, this guy, that guy, all in one match at Butlins back in, 2004. Like, and so they start going, hey, you know what? I'm going to start going to more of these shows, because I'm going to see the next, I'm going to see the next guys who are going to crack it over there. And then suddenly the scene built up, and that's how the business works. Talent drives the peaks and troughs of the business, not anything else. So all these promoters or talents who are enjoying the fruits of the generation before's labor, who are all patting themselves on the back now and acting all like protective of it, like it's theirs. Shut up. Don't be ridiculous. Like, the business is where it is now because of the awareness that was created over the last 10 years. And now those guys are enjoying the fruits of that labor. And the guys in the younger generation who get it, i.e. Pete Dunne, i.e. Tyler Bate, all these guys, they are not thinking like that. They're coming up to guys like me and to guys older than me and shaking our hands and appreciate, like, what's been done to provide these opportunities. Look at Marty, busted his butt for years and years and years. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and pat myself on the back for like 5-6 years ago. I was telling Impact, like, anyone who would listen, you want to get this guy. Like, he's going to be like, this guy's going to do something awesome. Like, I know it. He's like, yes, he's one of my best friends, but I'm telling you, this guy has it. He's going to do something big. And now look, you know what I mean? Like, it's talent that drives the business. And now, like, there's all these companies, because they're suddenly realizing, wow, some of the most sought after talent in the world is our talent, and they're here, and I can go down the street and see them. They're not thinking anymore like, oh, this is just a poor man's WWE. I guess we'll take the kids so they can see like a tribute show with, and which as well as anyone, Steve. Like, that was largely what the live event business was predicated on, a decade ago or more. Absolutely, like, it was sort of acceptance of, like, it's not as good as the American wrestling, but it's all right for a tenner. Come on down and have some fun. And no one really took themselves seriously. Suddenly, there was a whole load of us who did take ourselves a bit more seriously. And by the way, some of us got a lot of shit for that. from the generation before us, like for for supposedly taking ourselves a bit too seriously. But the fact is, we were just like, no, we think we can make it. And then the other thing about this too is like I always had this dream and this this hope that the business would build back up in Britain to a point where there was like I used to dream about that when we would when we were doing like Butlins runs and all that, because I would sit there and go, there's like 2,000 people here. I feel like we could be doing more. You know what I mean? Like this somebody needs to grab this by the throat and turn this into something. And a lot of promoters did manage to do that. But again, it was, a lot of that was predicated on the fact that there was now credibility in the business, thanks to all the boys who had gone, who had sacrificed their home lives and their comfort zones and said, I'm going to try, I'm going to go over there, I'm going to try. And they did.
Right, you're absolutely right. I mean, the comparisons to British wrestling shows as they used to be compared to WWE, and of course, it'd take a lot to get anywhere near what they are doing and what they were doing even back then. But now British wrestling is taking for its own commodity. The comparisons seem to not completely gone, but mostly gone, and people are paying good prices for tickets now to go watch British homegrown talent, and more so, it is seen that there's certain promotions in Britain that have thrived from using that word, imports, and very little British talent, and it's those shows that 2-3 years ago were doing fantastically well. This year, last year, not so well compared to companies like, WAW, Progress, who still use imports, but their shows are not import heavy. The focus now seems to be on our guys and our girls, which is, as you said, 10 years ago, that you couldn't even fathom that. That wasn't even
right. Well, there's an expectation now that that for a wrestling promotion to establish a brand, to establish story arcs, to establish certain things that are unique, certain idiosyncrasies and situations that are unique to their audience, that are catered just to them. And that was something that, again, was once sort of laughed at by a lot of people, in Britain. They would make fun of those promotions that were trying to do that. And don't get me wrong, certainly there are times where you go to an independent show and they're talking about like, oh, well, the storyline here, well, when was the last time you were here? 3 months ago? Like, you really think anyone remembers?
Exactly, yeah.
But, so there can be those pretentious things. But what I'm saying is, now with the internet and with like iPay-per-view and with, social media and things like that, there is the ability for guys, for different things to establish a brand and establish a sort of a base. And that's what's happened. And it's, again, it's really great. But it's what's got us to this point. But this ITV show is, in many ways, it's the biggest opportunity yet, because this is the one that's, this is the one where finally they're going, the like you said, the biggest free channel in the country is going, maybe we want wrestling again, and so once, like everything, I'm sure that's pretty much in a different way. I'm sure it's what happened the first time around when they said, hey, wrestling's quite popular, maybe we should put this on the television box, back in the in the 50s or whenever it was. So it's like, it's how it works. There is a market, there is an audience. But it has to be done right, and unfortunately, the overall, I think that this has been a bit of a storm in a teacup. See how British I went with that phrase there, Steve.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Well done.
Just for anyone that I my identity. But yes, like that's the best way to describe this, because for those of us in the business or the fans who are much more heavily involved in the who want to read about behind the scenes and all that stuff, and I'm not judging those people. Like it is interesting. I used to be one of them. For those people, it might seem like a much bigger deal than it is, because they're reading all about it. But for the vast majority of people, and I will say this, I do think it's a disaster anytime you have to refund tickets and like postpone a show, especially when they were selling well. It's just it's a huge trust issue that they're going to have to overcome the next time around. And I don't know what's happening there, whether they're going to move to a different venue this time and maybe let that one sort of cool off a bit, or whatever they're going to do. But that is a huge, and I do think that's a terrible thing. And you know, not speaking for the companies, but you know, I do feel bad for the fans who, you know, because obviously they're the ones who we care about the most, who made the effort to buy a ticket to come and be there and be part of the show, because we need that more than anything. But overall, you know, most of the people who are going to end up watching this show will never even know about this stuff. You know, because to them they're not, you know, they're not super deeply involved in it. They're not, you know, they might hear a rumbling here and there, or might see something about it, but I don't, you know, they're not like writing this whole thing off yet. So I think for the people that are, they just need to just chill.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I know you said the opening of the podcast, I'm a stirrer. That's my job. That's what I have to do. But I was intrigued as well to, obviously I didn't know. I knew as much as anybody else. So it was quite interesting to hear people's opinions. It's, some of them were quite funny. And I was pleased that the likes of yourself and Klondike Kate were jumping in there and giving, you know, your takes on it as well from inside of World of Sports. Obviously Klondike Kate's still involved with World of Sports. But Nick, thank you so much for shedding some light on the situation. Yes, I think it's a case that certain people jump on because, like you said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They believed in the product, they were excited for it, they jumped the gun, and they since sat down and thought, well, you know what, this thing's actually got more legs than we give it credit for. So let's sit back, let's see what we can work out, and let's see where we can actually, let's look beyond the 10 weeks. That's what we can do on a, you know, on a much longer term. And if the powers that be at Impact or Anthem and ITV can sit down and thrash out a great deal which will work out for the benefit of the roster members, the management, the network, and ultimately the fans who will tune in, then this is not a bad thing at all, right? This can only be good.
Absolutely. Like the ultimate goal here is to get this thing right from Jump Street and to create something that the audience can be proud of.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, I'm fully behind you guys. You do everything that Jeff's got in the pipeline. I can only trust in ITV that they're going to do the right thing. And the only thing we can all do now, is yourself included, is sit back and just wait for those announcements to come up as to when the future tapings are going to take place and what direction ITV and Anthem are going to take this new World of Sport. But Nick,
sure.
Thank you very, very much for your time today. Well, there you have it. I mean, what more can you say to that? The facts are on the table. So it turns out that the contract negotiations was somewhat true, somewhat false. And yes, it was between Anthem and ITV. But it's not the contract negotiations that everyone's been throwing around. The idea, you know, it's not the contract negotiation notions that people have been throwing around. It's not a case of more money or more creative control or giving Bob Lashley the power to squash people. It's nothing to do with that at all. Anthem and ITV are putting their heads together to ensure that this isn't just a 10-week special, that this can carry on into the future for not just weeks, but for months, and hopefully for years. And for anybody that's involved in British wrestling, whether you're a fan, whether you're a wrestler, a promoter, a booker, a backstage agent, a referee, however you're involved, and we all are equally involved, then this has got to be good, right? We do have Anthem, who have bought out Impact, who are excellent at producing wrestling shows. Let's forget about the booking, let's forget about the management decisions they've made in the past. On the whole, they know how to produce a TV show in a wrestling format. That's what ITV need. We all saw that, especially those that attended the ITV live tapings for the December special. You know, they weren't perfect, they were okay, but they weren't perfect, but they needed a lot of work, and that's what a lot of people called for, and that's why they brought in Jeff Jarrett and Impact Wrestling. But it seems on both sides that they want a bit more from this. They jumped the gun a little bit, they got a bit overexcited, they announced it way before they should have done. If they hadn't, I wouldn't have been having the chat today with Nick Aldis, and this would all be on episode 4 of the iSax Wrestling podcast. It's a good thing, in my opinion. I was one of the ones that was a doubter at first. I heard that Impact were involved with ITV, and I thought, well, this is no longer a British thing. But slowly in time, I kind of got my head around it, especially once I realised, well, you know, it's not just Impact, it's not TNA anymore, first and foremost, it's Impact. And it has been sold out, and there have been changes to management, and one of those key changes was Jeff Jarrett. And I think everybody will agree that TNA had their peak when Jeff Jarrett was in charge. You know, Dixie took over, Jeff took a back seat. He even, you know, stepped away at one point during his career under Dixie. That's when it started going wrong. But it's not like that anymore. And Jeff Jarrett probably is one of the most creative men in professional wrestling, right up there with Vince McMahon, Vince Russo, Dusty Rhodes, Triple H. So in my opinion, it's actually a good choice, and I do hope that they're able to string out this new timetable, this new scheduling for ITV to showcase World of Sport. I hope they manage to get that tied down sooner rather than later, but it sounds like, from what Nick was saying, that it's inevitable that it is going to happen. It's just a case of timing, and everything's got to be perfect. We only get one shot to get this right, and I do say we, I'm not involved with that product, but I do fully support that product, and I most definitely support British wrestling. So it is we the people, we the fans, we the wrestlers, we the promoters, we us British wrestling, and that's what we need to support. We all need to rally behind this now. We need to stop spreading rumours, we need to start jumping on bandwagons, and we need to start supporting British wrestling. And a big part of British wrestling right now is World of Sport. I hope this has shed some light for you. I hope you feel better now than you did at the beginning of this podcast about the whole World of Sport thing. It's going ahead, it just takes time. Mistakes have already been made, but the minor mistakes, people jumping the gun, but they're jumping the gun for the right reason. So I'm not going to argue with that. And once again, I'd like to thank Nick, who was a little bit under the weather today with teeth problem, for taking the time out in his very, very busy schedule to speak to us and to get his point across calmly and this time. No heat, no arguments. Also, I'd like to thank Jeff Jarrett for allowing Nick to come on and be the voice of Anthem, Impact, ITV to an extent. I look forward to hearing further news. I look forward to hearing further news stemming from the meeting between Jeff Jarrett and ITV, and hopefully they'll be able to shed a little bit more light on the whole situation too. We're not asking for all the details, we just want to know where this is going. We just want a rough time frame, we just want British wrestling to do well. So I wish every one of those guys the best of luck. I hope you guys will fully support them as well. Feel free to get in touch. Let me know what you think about this interview. Let me know what you think about what Nick had to say. Let me know what you think about the whole World Sports saga in itself. And of course, do not forget to like, rate, 5-star rate, in fact, and leave a comment on this. If not on iTunes, please leave a comment and rate on YouTube. It's equally as important. And get in touch. I love hearing your feedback. I've had feedback from every single one of the episodes so far. It's been pretty much 95% positive. So yeah, I'm glad that I'm ticking all the boxes for you guys. I will be back shortly with an episode 5. When, I'm not sure, at the absolute latest 2 weeks from today. I should imagine it'll be sooner than then, because there's a lot going on in the world of wrestling, there's a lot going on at Britannia Wrestling Promotions, and there's a lot going on in my life at the moment. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learnt a lot. I hope it gets you thinking, and I hope that you fully support British wrestling and the ISACS Wrestling Podcast. Good night.
You have been listening to the ISACS Wrestling Podcast. Follow Steve Saxon on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at ISACS Podcast. And remember to subscribe and 5-star rate this podcast on iTunes. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Saxon has left the building.